in favor of helping his friends rather than helping students.
He reads his papers in the House of Commons and seldom provides a real answer to a real question. So that's what I fear. But let's hope something good will come out of it.
Welcome back to Power in Politics, and hello to our viewers joining us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. We're standing by to take your questions about the We Charity controversy, so please post them in the comment section, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. As you just heard there, the opposition parties are laying out what they want to hear from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on the We controversy. Trudeau is set to testify for an hour tomorrow before the House Finance Committee. Opposition MPs say that's not long enough. After the appearances of Bill Morneau and the Kielburger We founders, what might the Prime Minister have to offer? Time for the Power Panel to weigh in on that. Niigaan Sinclair, columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press, joins us from Winnipeg. Over in Toronto, Amanda Alvaro of Pomp and Circumstance. Summa Strategies' Tim Powers is in Ottawa, along with Kathleen Monk of Earnscliffe Strategy Group. Hello, everybody. Wonderful to see you.
Hi. Hello.
Amanda, why don't I start with you? I just want to sort of start with almost like a broad look at what you're expecting tomorrow from the Prime Minister and what you anticipate his strategy going in will be.
Okay, just before we start, the disclosure that I've been giving for the last number of weeks, which is that my charity has provided funds to We Charity for some of their international development work in the past. Little disclosure.
Thank you.
I would say that overall, I don't know that we're going to get a lot more than what we received yesterday from that extensive testimony from the Kielburgers. I think that what was laid out to me and the big significant moments of that testimony was really about the fact that they were not keeping those funds, that any funds that weren't used would be returned to the government. They talked at length about the reason why it was made out to, the agreement was made out to the foundation versus the charity itself in order to avoid the liability issue. I think significantly, and something that probably opposition members will be pointed at more closely with the Prime Minister, is this quote unquote friendship and relationship. And I think the Kielburgers did a good job of putting a nail in that by talking about the fact that they do not have a social relationship with the Prime Minister or his wife. They also talked about the fact that they received more grants as a percentage of their overall budget from the Harper government than they did from the Trudeau government. So I don't expect that tomorrow, I don't think that there will be any big revelations. I think you'll hear more of the same. And that's actually some of the facts which unfortunately don't lend themselves to the provocative nature of what we all describe as the We scandal or We controversy, and simply the facts that back up the story that the Kielburgers laid out quite effectively yesterday.
Tim, do you think that's true?
Well, I always think Amanda means to be truthful. Well, first of all, I don't think the Kielburgers were effective yesterday. Yeah. I think, again, less in word and in style. And I think tomorrow for the opposition, where I would agree with Amanda, it's not necessarily going to be what comes out of the Prime Minister's mouth, but how he says it and the way in which he behaves. The opposition isn't really looking for one smoking gun here, Vassy. They're trying to push a narrative, aided by a lot of the facts in this story, that the Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance live in a different world. They aren't connected with the reality that the rest of us are, that they're a fet, if you will, and they do things when they think they're right, regardless of what the rules are. I think that's a lot of what the opposition's going to be trying to do tomorrow. I think the other things that is at play for tomorrow, if you look at the political strategy around it, is the Prime Minister and Katie Telford are going to want to mount a fairly solid defense, because they're going to have to determine when tomorrow's said and done, has this been enough? And if it's not enough to stem the flow of this story, does that mean Bill Morneau is no longer finance minister in a week or two? Because I think that may be the only way out of this for them, and that has other consequences.
Niigaan, what are you looking for in particular? Like, what approach do you anticipate after seeing what happened yesterday the opposition will take, and what strategy might the Prime Minister employ?
So I can't agree more that the Kielburgers did look particularly not good after yesterday. looked a little, they created more issues for the government, and that's what Trudeau is hoping to do for tomorrow, is to not create more questions and issues and gaps in the story in which the government's trying to tell in relation to this contract, as well as trying to shut down as much as possible. So what you're going to see tomorrow is, it's only 1 hour, so you're only going to see a one round of questions, a whole lot of platitudes, a whole lot of performances, a whole lot of interruptions, kind of a U.S. style, what we saw with William Burr recently. You're going to see a lot of kind of performative nature, because we have to remember this is a minority parliament, and we're in a situation in which the Conservatives don't want the government to fall, or they don't want to force an election because they're not ready, but at the same point they want to make the government look as bad as possible. So it's going to involve a lot of suggestions of impropriety, and unfortunately most of those improprieties are going to have either a great deal of smoke or a great deal of evidence that suggests that there is a deep problem of nepotism within the government.
I guess my big question going into this, Kathleen, is, like, does there need to be new information laid out? I thought part of the reason that Bill Morneau's testimony ended up being as impactful as it maybe was because we found out something new, right? The story right now, the details of it, there are a lot of them, and they've been out for a while. Do you think in order for sort of the oxygen to persist in this, there needs to be something new revealed tomorrow, one way or the other, either because the Prime Minister delivers it, or because he's questioned and it comes out, or do you think if the opposition can just keep going at the Prime Minister for an hour, that would be effective too? I don't know. What do you think?
I think that the opposition has to be smart on two fronts. They have to be smart, yes, to kind of uncover and come up with smart questions to reveal new information. But the second point is they also have to be smart on their strategy and tactics. I think they made a massive mistake actually having the Kielburgers there for 4 hours on Tuesday, because they basically were such a bad opening act that the headliner tomorrow has kind of an easy ride, right? Like the Kielburgers snowplowed the road for Mr. Trudeau and Ms. Telford tomorrow. They got out a lot of stuff. It was long. It was ugly. Their performance was bad. They didn't seem particularly humble. They didn't bring humility, and they were a bit testy at times. So by that comparison, I think that the Prime Minister, and frankly, Katie Telford, who's also extremely skilled, will manage well in the 2 hours collectively they have tomorrow. I just want to highlight one point, though, that I think that there was some new information that came out of Tuesday, and that was that with Michelle Douglas's testimony, which was, the former chair, she was riveting and actually revealed a lot, specifically that the board had asked the question, frankly, were speakers paid at WE events? And they were told no. But what it turns out, the Trudeau family was often paid for these after events, these corporate schmoozing.
Auxiliary events is what they.
The auxiliary events, right. And that is extremely problematic. And I think that is something that the opposition you'll see doubling down on in the coming days and weeks. Well, tactically, lastly, they'll try to move this to September, right? So we know that the House has 2 more sessions, and that's what I meant by tactics and strategy, that they might not, we'll see in a couple minutes, actually, if the Finance Committee wants to extend Prime Minister Trudeau's time at committee tomorrow. But I think if they're smart, they'll just punt it to September and call him back then when more eyes are on Parliament and they can, frankly, inflict more damage.
That's an interesting point. I should explain to our viewers that the Finance Committee is actually meeting right now to determine the details, to kind of hash out some of the logistics. If the Prime Minister, the opposition, for example, wants the Prime Minister, the Conservatives, the Prime Minister to appear for a longer amount of time, as well as the dates could change, the times could change. They're trying to separate the testimony between the Chief of Staff and Katie Telford and the Prime Minister. So we're standing by to find out what happens in that committee, and we'll bring the news live to all of you and to our audience. Right now, though, I'm going to take a quick commercial break. As I mentioned, we are taking your questions live, so we will take them through the break, and then we'll take them when we come back. So keep posting them. We've already got a ton of them in the comment section on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. We are back with the Power Panel in just a few minutes. All right, we're back in the commercial. Hey guys, we'll try to get through this. I know we don't have a long commercial, so I'm just going to start in the order they were given to me. And Amanda, I'll start with you. Matthew Enright on Twitter asks, how could there not have been a more thorough vetting of this company, the charity, before the contract was awarded? What do you think about that?
Well, I think that there's a lot of innuendo, a lot of rumor, a lot of he said, she said about We Charity. There hasn't been an investigation. There isn't a criminal investigation. There's a lot that's been put out there, but none of it has been justified. There hasn't been a lot of evidence behind it. And I think it's very concerning, frankly, that we continue to put the word scandal beside we. We're looking at the decimation of a charity that just months ago was like a Canadian golden child, internationally developing communities, putting kids in Kenya through high school for the very first time, thousands of communities, healthcare centers, education communities. I mean, things that we could never dream of, and all of that down the tube because to score some political points. I have a real problem with the way that this charity has been treated without it be given the true due diligence that should be required.
Do you think it's all I understand the point you're making. I think they have done a lot of good. I think there are some pretty genuine questions being raised, including by the former chair of the board of directors, right? It's not like the media is just inventing this stuff out of thin air. I take your point. They have done a ton of good work. I get that. I saw Kathleen and Tim reacting to that. Do one of you guys want to weigh in?
I would just say quickly, Amanda can have her perspective, but we have done more damage to themselves by the way they have reacted and appear to be more interested in the gold than in the child. And as Kathleen said a few moments ago, the question the chair was asking were pretty serious. Why weren't those questions answered? That's pretty germane. We've heard about problems with their board. The very last thing I'd say about this, the government itself, whether it be the Prime Minister or anybody else at Cabinet, should have asked why weren't there more options to consider. That's just good public policy decision making. So there's lots of blame to be spread around.
There's a lot I could add to that. We have to cut it off. But just on the idea of considering others, there was a list of others that they did consider. Some of those organizations said that they hadn't been contacted, though, so I think there is more to flesh out journalism on that side of it. But we're going to fade to black because we're back in 20 seconds, and we'll keep going with these questions. Thanks, guys. Back in a second. Welcome back to Power in Politics with the Power Panel. Amanda Alvaro, Niigaan Sinclair, Tim Powers, and Kathleen Monk. We're taking your questions about the We Charity controversy as the Prime Minister is getting set to testify before a House of Commons committee on that very issue. We're streaming live on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Just post your comments below the comment section, or in the comment section, I should say, or below our tweet, and we're going to get to as many of them as possible. Kathleen, why don't I start with you? Brandon Amiot on YouTube asks, I think we actually had them on last night on the show. They're a student. There seems to be debate on whether or not this was a sole source contract or a contribution agreement. What difference does this actually make? Why is it important to the story?
Well, I'm not an expert in procurement with the government, so I just want to say that in terms of those contracts. But I would say what the issue truly is, and from a student's perspective, they're going to be asking, what's going to happen to that money for students now?
We have a lot of those questions.
Pardon?
We have a lot of those questions. I was just saying, like a lot of people have.
Yeah, and students are asking that because it should either go towards some kind of a waiver for tuition or an increase in the student federal student work experience program, the student summer student experience program, I think it's called, that happens every year through the federal public service. But I think it matters the details of the contract and that kind of forensic kind of examination, including what you just mentioned before the break, which is crucial, is examining what other companies or organizations, nonprofits, were approached to possibly implement this plan. And I understand from the testimony previously that it's not just nonprofits, that corporations were also considered too as possible implementers. So how much due diligence was done there? What negotiations happened? And how did the public service, if they in fact did, land just on we?
Yeah, there's a bunch of questions on that. Niigaan, Charlotte on YouTube asks, why was we considered the only organization who could have distributed this contract? Furthermore, who in the public sector made this apparent recommendation and why. And this speaks to a lot of what is at the heart of all of this. The insinuation, the narrative, the accusation towards the government is that they had a close relationship with we and therefore decided to give them this agreement at a time when they needed a financial boost. We says we weren't going to make any money from this. We weren't going to profit off of this. It was the public service that came calling to us. And the government, I should also say, says that it was the public service that made this recommendation to go with we to them.
Yeah. I think it's absolutely disgenuine to keep hearing this story that we was not going to profit in some way. Now, maybe financially they weren't going to profit, but they certainly were going to profit in terms of PR, in terms of a huge amount of public interest of the organization. And of course, that always leads to more donations down the road. In fact, Bill Morneau has come out talking about further donations, donating, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, both his family and then others within those relationships. The real issue here is that there were many national charitable organizations who were equipped, who have come out and said that we would be able to have delivered an initiative such as that, but we never had an opportunity to apply for that funding. And I think what it indicates is during the commercial break, we were talking a little bit about the profile of the WE organization. There is a central Canadian interest in sort of a voyeur charity internationalism that involves kind of a lot of money. And I don't think people are questioning some of the good things that we did, even though there are the fact that many employees are coming out and saying that we is highly problematic in the way they deliver things overseas and locally. In fact, they have no interest in Indigenous communities, for example, other than to say that, that we're interested in Africa, but not in the backyard of our own communities. But it's about how they do the business and what the business that they're delivering and how they fostered relationships. In fact, leapfrogging other organizations like the United Way, for example, is just one of many that could have delivered this initiative. And that's a very good question. I think every single Canadian has a similar question of why is there such a favoring that results in political benefits for both the Liberal Party and for the WE charity?
I think there are sort of two tracks there, and Amanda, I'll get you to weigh in on it because I take your point that there hasn't been it's not like I have a document that conclusively shows that those allegations are true. I will put forth that there are those questions being raised. So I do see both sides of that. I think where the government is concerned, at the heart of this is whether or not the accusation that this was them sort of building on what is described by the opposition as a cozy relationship, or whether this was truly a recommendation from the public service anchored in fact that they just acted on.
So the public service says it was a recommendation from the public service. We Charity says it was a recommendation from the public service. The government says it was a recommendation from the public service. The only people who are saying it wasn't a recommendation from the public service are the opposition MPs and all the media who decide to cover it that way. I think many employees have come out. I think that's egregious. Many employees haven't come out. They literally have thousands of employees. I just think that there are...
Well, actually, they don't. They fired 200 of them in March. They have 187, I think.
Well, they laid them off. They laid them off because schools were closed and because they had to. And one of the things that they said yesterday in the testimony was that their hope was that through these grants, they would hire some of those laid off people back. I just think that the critique of a charity that's in many ways ubiquitous, they're like the McDonald's of charities. They've been, they're in every school. They've touched literally tens of thousands of Canadian lives, not to mention the hundreds of thousands of international lives. If you haven't been there, if you haven't stood on Kenyan soil, shoulder to shoulder with girls who never would have gone to school, but got to go to school and graduate and have a future because of these guys, I mean, to say maybe they did some good work is about the most disappointing words that I've heard on this show before. That is just, it's just wrong.
I mean, just to be honest.
Okay, wait, Niigaan, why don't you respond to that, and then we'll get Tim in.
It's just poor reporting, to be honest.
Okay, let's let Niigaan respond.
What I would say is, first off, I've lived in Africa. I've lived in Africa for over a year and spent my time working with international organizations.
Amanda, please let him finish.
It's not a matter of comparing apples to oranges, but what it is to say is that former employees of the organization have come out to say that the way that they deliver the work overseas has been exploitative in the ways in which they bring students overseas to be involved in projects which ultimately are counteractive to the work of communities. You can read up on different media reports that have come out in just the past few days. But this is, again, not an issue about saying that they haven't done good work. Obviously, they've done good work, but it's to say that the way in which they're procuring that work, obtaining that work, is highly problematic.
Tim, go ahead.
But listen to how...
Amanda, you'll get back in, I promise.
But you saw it in Amanda's answer. Amanda, rightfully, because she's worked with we, has a great pride in what they do. But that's not the point. The point is, why weren't there questions asked about all of that? I think what the opposition and the public is arguing, why was the government so enamored with we? Why wasn't there a challenge function performed? Why wasn't that challenge function done to the degree that this organization we're going to get $1 billion? It's great that we have done great work, but they're not the only charity in the world who've done great work. And I think that's why people are frustrated that, well, we've worked with we know how good are we, nobody else can possibly do it. That's the public relations and political problem here, and that's why the government is mired in the mess that it is.
I think as far as, Kathleen, I'll get you in as well, as far as the question around, and I just want to circle back to the government here, because that's, I think, what the focus of the committee is at least supposed to be tomorrow. I take Amanda's point that Rachel Wernick has said, for example, the public service, that they are the ones that recommended it. Minister Chagger often on the show says, look, we did consider other organizations, and I'll point to a few Liberal MPs who have even raised questions about this. We did consider other organizations. As part of what they released to the committee a few days ago, including the agreement, there was a list of other organizations. Now, CTV News called some of them, and they said they were capable of delivering. Some of them said that they had not been contacted by the government. I think those are valid questions for the government. How much consideration did you give to other organizations that could have delivered this? We also know from the testimony yesterday that back in May, nearly 2 months before that agreement was signed, they were told by the bureaucracy, by the public service, and I'm not implicating the government per se here, but by the public service, that they could start incurring reimbursable expenses. They could start hiring people. The deal had not yet been struck, but we was told that would be the case. I think that's why there are questions. I don't think it's in an effort to malign anyone. There are questions about the process by which the government decided this was the deal, this was the agreement that should be pursued. Kathleen?
Amanda's an incredible communicator, and she is effectively trying to reframe the conversation on the good works that she attested that we has done. But the question that we're trying to uncover, and the committee's trying to uncover, is why. One of the questions, there are many, but one of the questions is, why did the public service just put this one organization forward? Like, it rarely does that. And anyone who's tried to work with the government to do contribution agreements, they may get announced in a budget, and it takes about 18 months for them to get, written and finalized and out the door.
But that's what the government says. It's because of the speed, right? Because they didn't have 18 months. That's the position they
but the speed is one thing. The selection of one organization, and we've seen testimony from other organizations that, raised their hand or could have offered the service. I believe one is called Global Medic. There's that could have provided these kind of administrative services. It's rare for the public service, who's always supposed to provide unvarnished, truth to power, kind of different ideas, the best ideas, to have just suggested this one organization.
Okay, I want to let Amanda, let's just let Amanda respond quick, and I'll get you, Tim. We got to go soon, but Amanda, go for it.
Sure, go ahead.
Well, I just think, again, the public service has come out to say that they made that recommendation. The question might be why the public service made that recommendation, but it was the recommendation that they made. Somebody earlier said, why is this government so enamored with we? The Harper government gave more grants to we as a percentage of budget than the Trudeau government has. So I think people have been, in general, enamored with an organization that has done such incredible, thoughtful, meaningful work on Canadian soil and abroad. It would make sense that an organization with their breadth and depth into students would be the type of organization that the public service would put forward. And I just want to make one point, because I think it's very concerning to me when we say something like, a handful of former employees have had something to say about delivery internationally. Dozens and dozens of current employees would have a very different thing to say.
Okay, Tim, go for it. I just want to raise one more question from our viewer, and Tim, you can go. Is Prime Minister Justin Trudeau allowed to make an announcement at the Commons Finance Committee tomorrow? My prediction, the student mess will now be a grant. That's from Ronnie Whitcomb. Do you think something like that might happen tomorrow?
Well, the Prime Minister can do whatever he wants.
Yeah, there's nothing to prevent him.
But just back to the salient point, though, it doesn't matter what the public service recommended. The role of cabinet, the role of elected officials is to perform a challenge function. It appears the challenge function wasn't brought forward. Yes, the Harper government gave WE money, but they didn't give them a nearly $1 billion contract. My point, Amanda, about enamored was
they weren't in a global pandemic either.
No, fair point. But in the same vein, they worked. They did deal with a global economic recession, and they didn't hand out billion-dollar sole source contracts. Sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees because you live in the forest, and that appears to be the problem here. That's why so many people are.
It is egregious what we are doing to this charity. It is egregious.
It's not anything to the charity.
Okay, I have to cut it.
About challenge functions.
I have to cut it off there. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate your insights and your time this evening. Thanks to Tim Powers, Kathleen Monk, Niigaan Sinclair, and Amanda Alvaro. We are going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, we're going to turn to a subject I know a lot of you care about, kids going back to school. We've got 3 experts coming up to talk a bit about that. Stay with us. We're back with more Power and Politics after this.